I never thought a snowstorm would turn me into a neighborhood legend. But here I am, sitting in my warm living room watching the evening news report on the legal battle that's consumed Pleasant Valley estates for the past 3 months. My name is Marcus Ingram, and I'm a 34-year-old software engineer who moved to Pleasant Valley Estates in Akron, Ohio, about 2 years ago. The neighborhood seemed perfect when I first saw it. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, friendly neighbors waving from their porches. What I didn't realize was that beneath that picture-perfect surface lurked a homeowners association run by the most power-hungry people I'd ever encountered. The whole mess started on a frigid Tuesday morning in January. I'd woken up to find nearly 18 inches of fresh snow blanketing everything. My first thought was gratitude that I worked from home and didn't need to commute. My second thought was annoyance at the prospect of clearing my driveway. I'm not lazy, but shoveling that much snow is backbreaking work, especially when you're doing it alone. I just finished my first cup of coffee when my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was Patricia Carmichael, the HOA president, bundled up in a designer winter coat that probably cost more than my car payment. Her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't have a single snowflake on it, and her makeup looked like she just stepped out of a salon. "Good morning, Marcus," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I lied, already sensing this wasn't a social call. "What can I do for you?" "Well, as you know, we've had quite the snowfall overnight. The HOA board had an emergency meeting this morning, and we've decided to implement a new neighborhood assistance program." She paused, clearly expecting me to be impressed by this announcement. "Okay," I said slowly. "What kind of assistance program?" "We're requiring all able-bodied residents under the age of 50 to help clear the driveways of our board members. It's only fair, considering all the work we do for the community." Her tone suggested this was the most reasonable request in the world. I stared at her for a moment, certain I'd misheard. "You want me to shovel your driveway?" "And the driveways of the other board members, yes. We've divided the neighborhood into sections. You've been assigned to my house and Vice President Donald Mercer's house. Both are on Maple Ridge Drive, just 2 blocks from here. Shouldn't take you more than a few hours." "A few hours," I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "Patricia, that's 18 inches of snow. It'll take me all day to clear my own driveway, let alone 2 others." She waved her hand dismissively. "I'm sure a strong young man like you can manage. The HOA bylaws clearly state that residents must comply with board directives related to community welfare. This certainly qualifies." I'd actually read the HOA bylaws when I moved in, unlike most people. They were 47 pages of dense legalese, but nowhere in that document was there anything about forced labor. I don't remember seeing anything about mandatory snow removal for board members. Patricia's smile tightened. "It falls under Section 12, Paragraph 8, Community Betterment Initiatives. The board has full discretion to implement programs that benefit the neighborhood." I think that section refers to things like neighborhood cleanups and beautification projects, not making residents shovel specific people's driveways. Her expression turned cold. "Are you refusing a direct order from the HOA board?" "I'm saying I'll shovel my own driveway, and if you need help with yours, you're welcome to hire a snow removal service like everyone else." Patricia pulled out her phone and started typing rapidly. "I'm documenting this refusal. You realize there will be consequences. For not being your unpaid servant, I'll take my chances." She gave me a look that could have frozen the remaining coffee in my mug. "You'll regret this, Marcus. Nobody defies this board and gets away with it." With that parting threat, She turned and carefully picked her way down my unshoveled front steps. I closed the door and stood there for a moment, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and disbelief. I'd dealt with difficult people before, but this was beyond anything I'd experienced. The sheer audacity of demanding I shovel her driveway, as if I were some kind of indentured servant, made my blood boil. My neighbor, Tom Richardson, called me about an hour later. Tom was a retired postal worker in his 60s with a dry sense of humor and a healthy skepticism of authority. "Hey Marcus, did you get the royal summons this morning?" he asked with a chuckle. "You mean Patricia's insane demand that I shovel her driveway?" "Yeah, I got it. Same here. She wanted me to do 3 driveways." I told her my back couldn't handle it, which is actually true, but even if it wasn't, I wouldn't do it. This woman thinks she's running a dictatorship. "What's her problem?" I asked. "I mean, I know she's on a power trip, but this is extreme even for her." Tom sighed. "Patricia moved here about 5 years ago after her divorce. She was married to some big-shot lawyer in Cleveland, got a massive settlement, and bought the biggest house in the neighborhood. Within 6 months, she'd maneuvered her way onto the HOA board, and within a year, she was president. She's been making everyone's life miserable ever since. Can't people vote her out? They tried last year. She and her cronies control the voting process, and somehow the ballots always go missing or get disqualified for technical reasons. Plus, she's driven out anyone who seriously challenged her. The Hendersons moved after she fined them into oblivion for having the wrong shade of mailbox. The Patels left after she reported them to the city for every minor code violation she could find. That's insane. How is that legal? Probably isn't, but most people don't want to spend thousands on lawyers to fight an HOA. They just leave and cut their losses. After hanging up with Tom, I spent the next 2 hours clearing my own driveway. The snow was heavy and wet, the kind that makes your back ache and your hands cramp even through thick gloves. By the time I finished, I was exhausted and sweaty despite the freezing temperature. I was heading inside when I noticed an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a formal violation notice on HOA letterhead, stating that I'd failed to comply with a mandatory community service directive and was being fined $500. $500 for refusing to shovel someone else's driveway. That evening, I received an email from Patricia with the subject line, "Urgent. Compliance required." The message reiterated the fine and added that if I didn't shovel her driveway by noon the following day, the fine would increase by $250 per day until I complied. I called my friend Rachel, who was a paralegal in Cleveland. After I explained the situation, she was silent for a moment before bursting into laughter. "I'm sorry," she said, catching her breath. "It's not funny, but that's the most ridiculous thing I've heard all year. They absolutely cannot enforce that. HOAs have authority over property maintenance and community standards, but they can't compel you to provide free labor for specific individuals. That's not even legally gray. That's just straight up not allowed. So what do I do? Document everything. Save all the emails. Take photos of the violation notices. Record any interactions if Ohio's a one-party consent state, which it is. If they try to actually collect these fines, you'll have grounds for harassment charges and potentially a lawsuit." I spent the rest of the evening researching Ohio HOA laws and reading through horror stories on various homeowner forums. I found hundreds of stories about tyrannical HOA boards, but even by those standards, Patricia's demands were extreme. The next day, I woke up to find my car had been towed. Not because it was parked illegally, but because Patricia had called a towing company and claimed it was abandoned. The towing company's lot was 15 miles away, and it cost me $200 to get my car back. When I confronted the tow truck driver, he shrugged apologetically. Lady called and said it was an HOA violation. We have a contract with several associations in the area. I just do what they tell me. I filed a police report for the illegal tow, but the officer who took my statement didn't seem particularly interested. HOA dispute, he said, as if that explained everything. You'll probably need to handle that through civil channels. By the time I got home, it was past 2 in the afternoon, and I found another violation notice on my door. This one claimed I'd failed to maintain my property to community standards because my driveway had excessive snow accumulation. My driveway was completely clear. They were just making things up now. That night, Tom called me again. I heard about the tow truck. That's a new low, even for Patricia. I'm starting to think I should just move. This is getting ridiculous. Don't let her win, Tom said firmly. That's exactly what she wants. She drives out anyone who stands up to her, and then she has free rein to terrorize everyone else. So what do you suggest? Fight back. But be smart about it. Patricia operates in legal gray areas and hopes people won't call her bluff. You need to make it clear you're not intimidated. The following weekend brought another major snowstorm. This one was even worse than the first, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow over 48 hours. I watched from my window as the neighborhood transformed into a winter wonderland, knowing that the aftermath was going to be brutal. Sure enough, at 7 in the morning on Sunday, my doorbell rang. This time it wasn't just Patricia. She'd brought Donald Mercer, the vice president, and Susan Walsh, the treasurer. All three stood on my porch looking like a delegation from the world's most annoying country. Marcus, Patricia said coldly, we need to discuss your continued refusal to participate in community initiatives. You mean your illegal demand that I shovel your driveways for free? I replied, not bothering to hide my irritation. Donald stepped forward. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with thinning hair and the officious manner of someone who'd never held real authority in his life. Your attitude is becoming a real problem. The HOA board has broad powers to maintain community standards, and your defiance is setting a bad example. I've maintained my property perfectly. My driveway is always cleared, my lawn is always mowed, and I've never violated any actual rule in the bylaws. Susan, a thin woman with sharp features and a perpetual frown, pointed at me accusingly. You've accumulated over $2,000 in fines. That money will be placed as a lien against your property if you don't pay within 30 days. Those are fake fines for made-up violations. I'm not paying a cent. Patricia's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. The HOA has legal authority to place liens and even foreclose on properties with unpaid assessments. For legitimate violations, sure, but you can't just make up rules and enforce them retroactively. I've talked to a lawyer. That was a slight bluff. I'd only talked to Rachel, and she wasn't technically my lawyer, but they didn't need to know that. Then your lawyer will be hearing from our lawyer, Patricia said. And legal fees will be added to your fines. I suggest you comply before this gets even more expensive. After they left, I sat at my kitchen table feeling a mix of anger and anxiety. I couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle, but I also couldn't let them steamroll me. I needed a plan. That's when inspiration struck. If Patricia wanted to play games with snow removal, I could play games right back. I spent the rest of Sunday and most of Monday clearing my driveway. But this time, instead of piling the snow along the sides of my property or in my backyard, I loaded it into my truck. Trip after trip, I hauled snow from my driveway and transported it exactly 2 blocks to Maple Ridge Drive. Patricia's house was impossible to miss. It was a massive colonial with white pillars and a circular driveway. The driveway itself was about 50 feet long and had already been professionally cleared. You could see the perfect black asphalt gleaming in the winter sun. I backed my truck up to the entrance of her driveway and dumped my first load of snow right across the opening. Then I went back for another load, and another, and another. It took me 6 hours and 23 trips, but by the time I was done, there was a wall of snow at least 4 feet high completely blocking the entrance to Patricia's driveway. You couldn't even see the street from her front door anymore. It was a magnificent barrier of compacted snow and ice. I was loading my 24th and final trip when Tom appeared, his eyes wide with delight. "Oh my God," he said. "You're actually doing it. You're snow-walling Patricia." "I'm just relocating my snow," I said innocently. "It's my property, my snow. I can put it wherever I want on public streets, right? Technically, I think you're supposed to put it on your own property." "Are you going to tell on me?" Tom grinned. "Hell no, I'm going to help you." He went home and came back with his own shovel. Together, we added another 2 feet to the snow wall, making it dense and solid. By the time we finished, it was getting dark. The wall of snow blocking Patricia's driveway was a thing of beauty, at least 6 feet high and probably 8 feet deep. It would take hours with heavy equipment to clear. "She's going to lose her mind," Tom said, admiring our handiwork. "Good. Maybe she'll understand what it feels like to have someone mess with your property." We didn't have to wait long. I was barely home for 20 minutes when my phone started ringing. Patricia's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. She called 4 more times, each call going unanswered. Then came the text messages. "Remove that snow immediately. This is vandalism. I'm calling the police. You'll pay for this." I responded with a single message. "Just relocating my snow. HOA bylaws don't say where I have to put it." 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. I'd been expecting this and had already pulled up Ohio's laws on snow removal on my laptop. The officer who came to my door was young, probably in his late 20s. His name tag read Officer Stevens. "Evening, sir. I got a call about a snow-related dispute." "Hi, officer. Yes, I moved snow from my driveway and placed it on a public street. Is that illegal?" Officer Stevens looked uncertain. "Well, the caller says you deliberately blocked her driveway." "I placed snow on a public street. The street parking and right-of-way are public property. I didn't touch her driveway itself." "But you blocked access to her driveway. Is there a law against that? I'm genuinely asking, because if there is, I'll move it." "But if I'm allowed to pile snow on public property, then I haven't done anything wrong." Officer Stevens pulled out his phone and spent a few minutes looking something up. Finally, he sighed. "Technically, you're supposed to place removed snow on your own property when possible. Placing it in the street can be considered a violation of municipal code if it obstructs traffic." "Is Maple Ridge Drive obstructed? Can cars still pass?" "I'd have to look at it. I'll come with you." We drove the 2 blocks to Patricia's house. She was standing in her driveway, or rather, trying to stand in her driveway. The snow wall completely blocked the entrance, but the street itself was clear. Cars could pass without any issue. Patricia rushed over to the police car. "Finally, officer, this man has vandalized my property. I want him arrested immediately." "Madam, he didn't vandalize your property. The snow is on public property. He deliberately blocked my driveway. I can't get my car out." Officer Stevens looked at the snow wall, then at me, then back at Patricia. I could tell he was trying not to smile. "Madam, while it's true that the snow is blocking access to your driveway, it's on public property and the street isn't obstructed. This seems like a civil matter between neighbors." "A civil matter? He's harassing me." "Have you been harassing this woman, sir?" Officer Stevens asked me, his tone making it clear he was going through the motions. "I've been clearing my driveway and relocating my snow. I haven't contacted her, threatened her, or done anything to her property. All the snow is on public property." Patricia's face was turning an alarming shade of red. "This is because I asked him to help with community snow removal. He's retaliating," she demanded. "I shovel her driveway for free," I corrected. "And when I refused, she started fining me thousands of dollars for made-up violations and had my car illegally towed. I filed a police report about the tow truck incident." Officer Stevens's expression shifted slightly. "You filed a report?" "Yes, sir. Report number 2025-0147. The officer who took it said it was a civil matter. Patricia jumped in quickly. "Those aren't made-up violations. The HOA has legitimate authority to enforce community standards." "By demanding free labor from residents?" I asked. "That's not what happened." "Do you want me to play the recording of you demanding I shovel your driveway?" That was another bluff. I hadn't recorded the conversation, but Patricia didn't know that. Officer Stevens held up his hands. "Okay, this clearly goes beyond a snow dispute. Madam, if you believe you've been wronged, you can file a civil complaint. Sir, I'd recommend moving the snow to your own property to avoid any potential violations. Can you both agree to that?" "I'll move it tomorrow," I said, "after she removes all the fraudulent fines from my account." "I will do no such thing. Those fines are legitimate. Then I guess the snow stays where it is until we resolve this through legal channels." Officer Stevens looked tired. "Sir, I'm asking you to move the snow as a courtesy. And I'm saying I will as soon as this dispute is resolved. The snow isn't hurting anyone, it's not blocking traffic, and it's on public property. If the city wants to remove it, they're welcome to. But I'm not doing it until the HOA stops harassing me." Patricia started to say something, but Officer Stevens cut her off. "This is a civil matter. You'll both need to work it out between yourselves or through the courts. Madam, if you need your driveway cleared, I'd suggest calling a snow removal service." "Do you know how much that costs?" Patricia demanded. "About as much as you've been illegally fining me," I said pleasantly. After Officer Stevens left, Patricia stood in front of the snow wall shaking with rage. I could see several neighbors watching from their windows, and Tom was standing on his porch with an enormous grin on his face. "This isn't over," Patricia hissed at me. "I agree. It's not over until you cancel the fake fines and agree to stop harassing me." I went home feeling triumphant, but also slightly anxious. I'd escalated things significantly, and I wasn't sure what Patricia would do next. The next morning, I woke up to find a notice taped to my door. The HOA was calling an emergency meeting that evening to discuss serious violations of community standards and neighborly conduct. Attendance was mandatory for all residents. The meeting was held at the community center, a small building at the entrance to the neighborhood. I arrived to find the parking lot packed. Apparently, word of the snow wall had spread, and everyone wanted to see what would happen. Inside, the room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Patricia was in the center, flanked by Donald and Susan. Her expression was glacial. I took a seat near the back next to Tom. "Big turnout," I whispered. "Everyone's heard about what you did. You're either a hero or a villain, depending on who you ask." Patricia called the meeting to order by banging a gavel 3 times. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We have a serious matter to address tonight. One of our residents has engaged in behavior that threatens the safety and harmony of our community." Several people turned to look at me. "Marcus Ingram has deliberately and maliciously blocked the driveway of a board member, creating a safety hazard and demonstrating flagrant disregard for community standards. A woman in the front row raised her hand. "Didn't you try to make him shovel your driveway for free?" Patricia's jaw tightened. The HOA implemented a community assistance program to help board members who dedicate countless hours to serving this neighborhood. Mr. Ingram refused to participate and then retaliated in a childish and dangerous manner. "It wasn't childish," called out someone from the middle of the room. "It was hilarious." Several people laughed and Patricia banged her gavel again. "This is not a joke. We're here to discuss appropriate consequences for Mr. Ingram's actions." I stood up. "I'd like to address the board." "You haven't been recognized to speak. This meeting is about me. I think I have the right to defend myself." Donald leaned over and whispered something to Patricia. She nodded reluctantly. "You have 2 minutes." I walked to the front of the room, my heart pounding. Public speaking wasn't my strong suit, but anger was a powerful motivator. I moved to Pleasant Valley Estates because it seemed like a nice place to live. I followed all the rules, paid my HOA fees on time, and tried to be a good neighbor. Then, after the first major snowstorm, Patricia showed up at my door and demanded I shovel her driveway and the vice president's driveway for free. Not asked. Demanded. She claimed it was some kind of community assistance program, even though nothing like that exists in the HOA bylaws. I saw several people nodding. When I refused, she started issuing fake fines. Failure to comply with community service directives, excessive snow accumulation on a cleared driveway. She even had my car illegally towed and claimed it was abandoned. I've been charged over $2,000 in bogus fines in less than 2 weeks. "Those aren't bogus fines," Patricia interrupted. "Then show me where in the bylaws it says you can compel residents to provide free labor for board members. Show me where it says a completely cleared driveway constitutes excessive snow accumulation." "You can't, because those rules don't exist. You made them up to punish me for not doing what you wanted." Susan stood up. "The board has broad discretionary powers to enforce existing rules, sure. But you can't create new rules on the fly and enforce them retroactively. That's not how HOAs work, and it's definitely not legal." A man in the front row stood up. "He's right. I'm an attorney, and I reviewed the bylaws after hearing about this situation. There's nothing that gives the board authority to compel personal service or create fines for non-existent violations." Patricia's face went pale. "And who are you?" "Greg Morrison. I live on Oakwood Drive. I just moved here last month, which is probably why you haven't tried to bully me yet." The room erupted in conversation. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly, but people ignored her. Greg continued. "I've been researching Ohio HOA law, and what you've done constitutes harassment and possibly theft through fraudulent fines. If Mr. Ingram wanted to pursue legal action, he'd have a strong case." "This is outrageous," Donald blustered. "The board doesn't have to tolerate these accusations." "Then sue me for slander," Greg shot back. "I'd love to discuss this in front of a judge." The meeting devolved into chaos. Residents started shouting questions at the board. How much money was in the HOA account? What were the board members' salaries? Why had 3 families moved out in the past year? Patricia tried to regain control, but it was too late. The facade of authority had cracked, and people were seeing the board for what it really was. A handful of petty tyrants who'd been abusing their power for years. Finally, Tom stood up and shouted over the crowd. "I move that we hold an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board." "Seconded," called out at least a dozen people. Patricia's face was now bright red. "That's not how this works. Board elections are held annually according to the bylaws." "Section 22, paragraph 4, Greg said, reading from his phone. A special election can be called if 25% of residents petition for one, or if a vote of no confidence passes with a 2/3 majority at any properly noticed meeting. This is a properly noticed meeting, and I'm pretty sure we have the votes. Patricia looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. This meeting was called to address a specific violation, not to hold elections. Then let's address it, I said. I moved snow from my property and placed it on a public street. I didn't break any laws. I didn't damage anyone's property. I just inconvenienced someone who's been making my life hell for refusing to be her unpaid servant. If the board wants to fine me for that, go ahead. But I think the community should know exactly what they're fining me for. The room went quiet. Everyone was looking at Patricia, waiting to see what she'd do. Finally, she stood up, gathering her papers with shaking hands. This meeting is adjourned. No, it's not, Greg said firmly. A motion is on the floor. We need to vote. I don't recognize the motion. You don't have to. The bylaws are clear. All in favor of holding a vote of no confidence in the current board, raise your hands. I looked around the room. Nearly every hand was raised. Even people I thought were Patricia's allies had their hands up. Opposed, only Patricia, Donald, and Susan kept their hands down. It wasn't even close. The motion passes, Greg announced. According to the bylaws, the board is suspended pending a special election, which must be held within 30 days. In the interim, board powers are limited to essential maintenance and financial management. No new fines or rules can be implemented. Patricia's face had gone from red to white. She looked around the room as if expecting someone to come to her defense, but nobody moved. You'll regret this, she said quietly, her voice shaking. All of you will regret this. Then she walked out, followed by Donald and Susan. The room erupted in applause and cheering. People came up to shake my hand and pat me on the back. Tom was grinning from ear to ear. You did it, he said. You actually stood up to her and you won. We won, I corrected. I couldn't have done this without everyone backing me up. Greg came over and introduced himself properly. That was something else. I've dealt with bad HOAs before, but this one takes the cake. Thanks for the assist. I was pretty sure I was right about the bylaws, but having a lawyer confirm it made all the difference. Happy to help. Listen, we should probably form a committee to oversee the election process. Patricia's not going to go quietly, and we need to make sure everything is done by the book. Over the next week, things in Pleasant Valley Estates changed dramatically. Greg formed an election oversight committee with 7 residents, including me and Tom. We reviewed the HOA's financial records and discovered some disturbing irregularities. Patricia had been paying herself a salary of $60,000 a year to serve as HOA president. The bylaws specified that board positions were voluntary and unpaid. Donald and Susan had been receiving $30,000 each. Together, they'd been draining over $120,000 annually from the HOA account. There were also questionable expenses. $50,000 for consulting fees paid to a company that didn't seem to exist. $30,000 for legal services from a law firm that had no record of representing the HOA. $20,000 for property improvements that nobody could identify. This is embezzlement, Greg said, reviewing the bank statements. They've been stealing from the HOA for years. Can we prove it? I asked. The financial records are pretty damning. The question is what we do about it. We could report it to the police, but that's going to be messy and expensive. Or we could give them a choice. Resign immediately, repay the stolen funds, and go quietly or face criminal charges. I vote for criminal charges, Tom said. They've made too many people's lives miserable. They deserve to face consequences. I agree, I said. But let's at least give them the option. If they repay everything and resign, we can avoid dragging this out. Greg drafted a formal letter outlining what we discovered and presenting the two options. We sent it via certified mail to Patricia, Donald, and Susan. Patricia's response came 3 days later. Instead of accepting either option, she hired a lawyer and threatened to sue the HOA for defamation and wrongful termination. "She doesn't get it," Greg said, reading the threatening letter. "She's not an employee. She can't be wrongfully terminated. And pointing out financial irregularities isn't defamation if it's true." So, what do? We go to the police. The following Monday, Greg and I met with Detective Sarah Chen at the Akron Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. We brought copies of all the financial records, the bylaws, and a timeline of events. Detective Chen listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally asking questions. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of competent authority. "This is pretty clear-cut," she said after reviewing everything. "Unauthorized payments, falsified expenses, retaliation against residents who challenged them. I'll need to investigate further, but based on what you've shown me, there's definitely probable cause for fraud and embezzlement charges." "How long will the investigation take?" I asked. "Depends on how cooperative they are. If they lawyer up and fight, it could take months. But sometimes when people realize they're caught, they fold pretty quickly." 2 weeks later, just as the HOA was preparing to hold its special election, Detective Chen called to let us know that arrests had been made. Patricia Carmichael, Donald Mercer, and Susan Walsh had all been charged with multiple counts of theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The story made the local news. I watched the broadcast with a mix of satisfaction and disbelief as Patricia was led out of her house in handcuffs, her perfectly styled hair finally mussed, her makeup streaked with tears. The reporter explained that the 3 board members had allegedly stolen over $400,000 from the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA over a period of 5 years. The investigation was ongoing, but prosecutors were confident they had a strong case. The special election happened the following Saturday. Greg Morrison ran for president, Tom Richardson for vice president, and a woman named Jennifer Wu for treasurer. They won unanimously. One of the new board's first actions was to cancel all fines issued during Patricia's tenure that weren't related to legitimate violations. My $2,000 in fake fines disappeared. They also reached out to former residents who'd been driven out by Patricia's harassment and offered to help them pursue restitution. The snow wall in front of Patricia's driveway had long since melted, but it had become something of a legend in the neighborhood. People called it the Great Snow Rebellion. Someone even made T-shirts with a cartoon drawing of a snow wall and the caption, "Pleasant Valley's Finest." 3 months after the arrests, I was sitting in my living room on a warm spring evening when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Detective Chen. "Detective, is everything okay? Just wanted to give you an update in person. Patricia Carmichael, Donald Mercer, and Susan Walsh all pled guilty this morning. They're cooperating with prosecutors to identify where the money went and help with asset recovery." "That's great news. What kind of sentences are they looking at?" "Patricia will probably get 3 to 5 years. Donald and Susan might get lighter sentences since they were following her lead, but they're still looking at prison time, plus restitution. They'll be paying back the HOA for a long time." "Good. They deserve it. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. A lot of people would have just moved or paid the fake fines to avoid trouble. You stood up for yourself and helped uncover a much bigger problem." After Detective Chen left, I walked around my neighborhood. Spring had arrived in full force and everything was green and blooming. People were out working in their yards, kids were playing in the street, and there was a sense of peace that had been missing before. Tom waved from his porch. "Hey, Marcus, come have a beer." I walked over and accepted a cold bottle. We sat in his rocking chairs, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. "You know," Tom said, "when you first moved in, I thought you were just another quiet tech guy who'd keep his head down and not make waves." "I thought that too." "Guess we were both wrong. You made some pretty big waves." "I just refused to shovel someone's driveway. Everything else kind of spiraled from there." Tom laughed. "That's one way to put it. You know what the best part is? Patricia's house went into foreclosure. Turns out she was living way beyond her means, and without the HOA money she was stealing, she couldn't make her mortgage payments. What happened to the house? A nice young family bought it. They have 3 kids. The little girl asked me yesterday if she could set up a lemonade stand on the corner this summer. I told her absolutely. Would Patricia have let her? Are you kidding? She would have cited 17 different bylaw violations and fined the parents into oblivion." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the evening. Finally, Tom spoke again. "You taught us all something important, Marcus. You showed us that bullies only have power if we give it to them." Patricia seemed so intimidating, so official with her bylaws and her threats, but in the end, she was just a person abusing authority she didn't really have. "I was terrified the whole time," I admitted. "I kept thinking she'd find some way to take my house or ruin my life." "But you didn't let that fear stop you. That's courage." The new HOA board turned out to be everything the old one wasn't. They were transparent about finances, holding monthly meetings where anyone could review the budget. They actually maintained common areas instead of pocketing maintenance funds. They enforced rules fairly and consistently, without targeting specific residents. Greg proved to be an excellent president. He had a background in corporate management and brought actual organizational skills to the role. Within 6 months, he'd restructured the HOA's finances, created a reserve fund for emergencies, and implemented a digital system for tracking maintenance requests and violations. The neighborhood transformed. People who'd been afraid to speak up during Patricia's reign became more engaged. We started having community events again. Summer barbecues, Halloween parties, holiday lights contests. The atmosphere went from tense and fearful to genuinely friendly. I became something of a minor celebrity, at least locally. The story of the snow wall made the rounds on social media, and a few national news outlets picked it up as a human interest story. I did a couple of interviews, always emphasizing that the real story wasn't about snow, but about standing up to corruption and abuse of power. One unexpected result was that other people started reaching out to me. I got emails from homeowners in other neighborhoods dealing with similar HOA problems, asking for advice. I connected them with Greg and other people who'd become amateur experts on HOA law and reform. We even started a small consulting group to help residents navigate disputes with their associations. The trial proceedings for Patricia, Donald, and Susan dragged on for months. I attended some of the hearings, mostly out of curiosity. Patricia looked like a completely different person. Gone was the imperious, perfectly groomed HOA president. In her place was a tired, defeated woman in a cheap suit, her hair graying at the roots, her face lined with stress. At one hearing, our eyes met across the courtroom. I expected to see hatred or defiance, but instead, I saw something else: resignation. She'd lost everything: her house, her reputation, her freedom, all because she couldn't resist the temptation to abuse a little bit of power in a suburban HOA. The final sentencing happened in August. Patricia received 4 years in prison and was ordered to repay $350,000. Donald got 2 years and owed $100,000. Susan got 18 months and owed $75,000. The judge was particularly harsh in his statement, noting that they'd violated the trust of their neighbors and used their positions for personal enrichment. HOAs exist to maintain property values and create pleasant living environments, Judge Morrison said. No relation to Greg, amusingly. When board members treat these organizations as personal piggy banks and use them to harass residents, they undermine the entire concept of community association governance. Your actions weren't just illegal. They were a betrayal of everyone who trusted you. After the sentencing, I felt a sense of closure. It was really over. Patricia and her cronies would face consequences for their actions. The neighborhood was in good hands, and life could return to normal. That evening, the new HOA board threw a celebration at the community center. It wasn't officially about the trial outcome. Greg was careful to frame it as a neighborhood unity event, but everyone knew what we were really celebrating. I stood near the snack table, watching people laugh and socialize. Kids ran around playing tag. Couples danced to music from a borrowed sound system. Tom was holding court near the punch bowl, retelling the story of the snow wall to a group of newer residents who'd moved in after the drama. Jennifer Wu came over with a plate of cookies. "You should be proud, Marcus. None of this would have happened if you hadn't taken a stand." "I just refused to shovel a driveway," I said, though I was smiling. "You did a lot more than that. You gave people permission to stand up for themselves. That's valuable." A thought occurred to me. "Can I ask you something? Why didn't anyone stand up to Patricia before? I mean, she was obviously corrupt and abusive. Why did people put up with it?" Jennifer considered the question carefully. "Fear, mostly. Fear of losing their homes, fear of conflict, fear that nobody would back them up. Patricia was good at isolating people. She'd target one household at a time, make them feel like they were the only ones with a problem. By the time people realized they weren't alone, they'd already given up or moved away. But I wasn't special. I'm just a regular guy who got mad about an unreasonable demand. That's exactly what made the difference. You were relatable. When people saw a regular guy standing up to Patricia and surviving, they realized they could do it too. You broke the spell of her authority." Later that night, as I was walking home, Greg caught up with me. "Marcus, hold up. I wanted to talk to you about something." "Sure, what's up?" "The board is looking for new members. We need someone to fill the secretary position. I think you'd be perfect for it." I laughed. "After everything I went through with the HOA, you want me to join the board?" "Exactly, because of everything you went through. You understand how important it is to use authority responsibly. Plus, you've proven you can't be pushed around or corrupted." "I don't know. I'm pretty busy with work." "Think about it. The position isn't demanding, maybe a few hours a month, and it would send a powerful message about how we do things differently now." I promised to consider it, and over the next few weeks I actually did. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I'd spent so much energy fighting against a corrupt HOA. Maybe it was time to put some energy into building a good one. I accepted the position in September. My first official act as secretary was to digitize all the HOA records and make them accessible to residents through a secure online portal. Transparency had been such a huge issue under Patricia's reign. I wanted to make sure everyone could see exactly how their money was being spent and what rules were being enforced. Life in Pleasant Valley estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. The neighborhood became known as a model for good HOA governance. We got written up in a property management journal as an example of successful reform. Greg and I even gave a presentation at a county meeting about HOA oversight and accountability. Patricia's house sold to the family Tom had mentioned. They were wonderful people. The husband, David, was a high school teacher. The wife, Maria, was a nurse. Their 3 kids were energetic and sweet. Within weeks, they'd become beloved fixtures in the neighborhood. One October evening, I was raking leaves in my yard when David came over with his youngest daughter, Emma, who was 6. "Marcus, Emma has a question for you," David said with a smile. Emma looked up at me with big, serious eyes. "Did you really build a giant wall of snow in front of this house?" I glanced at David, who shrugged. Kids at school were talking about it. She wanted to hear it from the source. I knelt down to Emma's level. "I did. The lady who used to live here wasn't very nice to me, and I wanted to show her that she couldn't push me around." "Was it a really, really big wall, about this high?" I held my hand above my head. Her eyes went wide. "Wow, did she get really mad?" "Very mad. But sometimes when people are being unfair, you have to stand up to them, even if it makes them angry." Emma nodded solemnly, processing this information. "Okay, thank you." Then she ran off to play with her siblings. David laughed. "She's going to tell everyone at school that she lives in the house with the legendary snow wall. Sorry about that. I hope it doesn't weird you out living there." "Are you kidding? It's part of the house's character now. Besides, we got it for a great price because of the foreclosure. Your snow wall indirectly saved us about $50,000. As fall turned to winter and the first snow began to fall, I found myself watching the white flakes with a sense of amusement rather than dread. Last year at this time, I'd been locked in battle with Patricia, not knowing how things would turn out. Now, a year later, she was in prison, the neighborhood was thriving, and I was part of a functional, honest HOA board. The first major snowstorm of the season hit in late November. I spent a Saturday morning clearing my driveway, piling the snow neatly along the edges of my property. Tom came out to clear his own driveway and we waved to each other. "Need any help?" I called out jokingly. "I think I can manage," he called back with a grin. That afternoon, I noticed David struggling with his snowblower. It kept stalling out and he looked frustrated. I walked over with my shovel. "Want a hand?" He looked up relieved. "Man, this thing is a piece of junk. I think it's the carburetor, but I can't get it running." "I've got a spare shovel. We can knock this out in 30 minutes if we work together." "Are you sure? That's really nice of you." We spent the next half hour clearing his driveway, talking about sports and work and neighborhood gossip. When we finished, Maria brought out hot chocolate for both of us. "You didn't have to do that," David said, "but I really appreciate it." "That's what neighbors do," I replied. "Help each other out because they want to, not because someone demands it." As I walked back to my house, I thought about how much had changed in a year. The neighborhood that had felt oppressive and hostile now felt like a real community. People looked out for each other. They attended HOA meetings not because they were forced to, but because they cared about where they lived. The court-ordered restitution money started coming in gradually. Patricia, Donald, and Susan were all working prison jobs and sending payments, though at the rate they were going, it would take decades to repay everything. The HOA also recovered some money from asset seizures. It wasn't the full amount stolen, but it was enough to fund several major improvements. We repaved the neighborhood streets, which had been in terrible condition. We installed new playground equipment at the community center. We started a neighborhood watch program and a community garden. Every decision was made transparently, with input from residents. By the time the second anniversary of the snow wall incident rolled around, Pleasant Valley Estates had been completely transformed. Property values had actually increased, not because of strict enforcement of arbitrary rules, but because people genuinely wanted to live in a well-managed, friendly neighborhood. I was at my computer one evening when I got an email from a woman named Angela Torres. She lived in a neighborhood in Columbus and was dealing with an HOA situation similar to what I'd experienced. Her board president was demanding that residents provide free landscaping services for board members' properties. I spent an hour writing a detailed response, explaining the steps I'd taken and connecting her with Greg and the resources we'd compiled. A week later, she wrote back to say that her neighbors had banded together and the board president had resigned rather than face investigation. Stories like Angela's became common. It turned out that abusive HOAs were a widespread problem, and people were hungry for information about how to fight back legally and effectively. Greg and I started a website documenting our experience and providing resources for homeowners dealing with similar issues. The website got thousands of visits within the first month. We heard from people all over the country dealing with petty tyrants, fraudulent fines, and selective enforcement. We couldn't help everyone, but we tried to point them in the right direction and share what we'd learned. One unexpected message came from a producer at a cable news network. They wanted to do a segment about HOA abuse and reform, using our story as the centerpiece. After some discussion with Greg and the board, we agreed. The segment aired in March, 2 years after the initial conflict. It featured interviews with me, Greg, Tom, and several other residents. They showed dramatic reenactments of the snow wall incident, which was frankly hilarious, and interviewed legal experts about HOA oversight. The response was overwhelming. The network's website crashed from traffic. Our resource website got so many visitors we had to upgrade our hosting. I received hundreds of emails and messages from people sharing their own HOA horror stories. More importantly, the attention led to actual policy changes. Several state legislators contacted us about drafting HOA reform legislation. Ohio introduced a bill requiring HOA financial audits and creating an oversight board for fraud complaints. Other states followed with similar measures. I testified before the Ohio House of Representatives in April, sharing my experience and advocating for stronger homeowner protections. It was surreal sitting in the state capitol, speaking into a microphone while legislators took notes. The problem isn't HOAs themselves, I said. In theory, they serve a legitimate purpose. The problem is the lack of oversight and accountability. When board members can issue arbitrary fines, create phantom rules, and face no consequences, abuse becomes inevitable. We need transparent financial reporting, clear procedures for challenging board decisions, and real penalties for fraud and harassment. The bill passed in June with bipartisan support. It wasn't perfect, but it was a meaningful step toward protecting homeowners from the kind of abuse I'd experienced. Patricia was released from prison after serving 2 years of her 4-year sentence. I heard about it from Tom, who'd kept tabs on the case. She's living in a small apartment in Cuyahoga Falls, Tom said. Working at a grocery store, she'll be on probation for years and still owes most of the restitution money. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me was satisfied that she'd faced consequences. Part of me felt something almost like pity. She'd thrown away her comfortable life because she couldn't resist the lure of petty power and easy money. Think she learned anything? I asked. Tom shrugged. Who knows? Some people never learn. But at least she can't hurt anyone else in an HOA. Life continued to move forward. I got a promotion at work. Tom's grandson started college. Greg's daughter got married at the community center, which had become a popular venue for neighborhood events. The community garden produced an amazing crop of tomatoes that summer. 3 years after the snow wall incident, Pleasant Valley Estates was featured in a national magazine article about model HOA governance. They interviewed residents, photographed our neighborhood, and praised the transformation from corrupt dictatorship to functional democracy. The article included a photo of me standing in my driveway with a snow shovel, a callback to where it all began. The caption read, "Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing in the snow." I framed a copy of the article and hung it in my home office, not out of ego, but as a reminder that ordinary people can make a difference when they refuse to accept injustice. A reminder that bullies only win when good people stay silent. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful act of rebellion is simply saying no. On a cold evening in January, exactly 4 years after Patricia had shown up at my door demanding I shovel her driveway, I found myself at another HOA meeting. We were discussing the budget for the coming year, debating whether to add more lighting along the walking paths or save the money for future road maintenance. It was boring. Wonderfully, beautifully boring. Just normal people having normal discussions about normal neighborhood issues. No threats, no intimidation, no corruption. Just democracy in action at its smallest, most local level. After the meeting, I walked home through streets lit by warm lamplight. Snow was starting to fall again, light flakes that drifted down like memories. I thought about everything that had happened, all the stress and conflict and eventual triumph. My driveway would need shoveling in the morning. I'd do it myself, pile the snow on my own property and get on with my day. It was such a simple thing, really. Such a normal part of winter life. But for me, it would always mean something more. It would always be a reminder of the time I refused to be pushed around, stood up for what was right, and helped create real change in my community. Sometimes a snow shovel is just a snow shovel, and sometimes it's a tool of revolution. I smiled at the thought, unlocked my door, and stepped into the warmth of home,